Emily. Welcome to Memos to the President. I'm here with two of my colleagues, Joe and Steven. Welcome, guys.
Great to be here.
Yeah, great to be here, man.
Finally, we get to do this. We talk a lot. We travel a lot together. We meet with a lot of delegations together. So I really wanted to start the conversation. The purpose of this conversation, obviously, today is we're releasing a major memo on foreign policy for the incoming administration. And the purpose of the memo is really not to address a holistic approach to foreign policy. Our focus is really how does foreign policy look in the age of AI with all these technological changes happening. And so we'll talk about the memo shortly, Joe and Steven. But before we start, I know you both served in the government. So I wanted to hear your story. Why did you join government, Joe? Share a little bit about your experience, and then over to you, Steven.
Yeah, so a lot of what we always talk about is you're an immigrant, I'm an immigrant. And so one of the things I always wanted to do when I was growing up was actually, this was, I was one of the 9/11 generation, right? And so that's really when I got really interested in how the world works and how the government works and what we need to do for ourselves, national security, and what democracy means for Americans, right? And so that's really what pushed me into government is first thing I did after undergrad was go to Peace Corps in Kyrgyzstan. So I spent 2 years there trying to teach English to villagers in Kyrgyzstan, which is amazing, beautiful country, really kind of tragic history in the past couple of decades as well in terms of how democracy has gone there, but just really, really beautiful people, beautiful country, great experience. And when I came back, I went to Georgetown for the Master of Science in Foreign Service program, also a great program. 2 years there, spent some time interning at the State Department, then ultimately got a presidential management fellowship at the State Department where I started first as the Belarus desk officer working on the so-called last dictatorship in Europe, which definitely a few more have come up since then.
Yeah.
So and then moved on to work on the EU for a few more years. I spent some time on the Hill, worked for Undersecretary of State Wendy Sherman, great person, great American, and then also Tom Shannon as well, Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, and then ultimately made my way to the White House where we met, working on Russia for a couple of years, first for Fiona Hill, and then a string of other senior directors that came in afterward. And really just a great experience, obviously doing everything we can to make sure that national security is front and center in the work that we do when it comes to the NSC. Obviously, that's the mission statement for what it is, but just an amazing experience in terms of the career officials that were at the White House, right? We're all there serving our nation, doing the best that we could to make sure that the ship of state really kind of, sailed forward in the right way. And, we've talked a lot about our experience at the White House, in those circumstances where there's just so much that's going on, right? There's no higher level when it comes to national security and the type of work that you can do inside government. It's just a great experience to be around so many people that are so dedicated to the mission that we're all on the same page about serving our country and making sure that we do right by our country. So
Thanks, Joe. I tell a lot of our colleagues and a lot of our friends that you probably had the toughest job at the NSC, and you did it for 3 years. So thank you for that. And I think for my experience, I think the last Principals Committee meeting we had was the topic that you were supporting. So thank you for that as well. It was a great experience to walk out of the White House on a high note after the Principals Committee meeting decision. But over to you, Steven. You come from USAID before you came to SCSP. So a little bit about your career journey so far.
Absolutely. Well, it wasn't preordained that I'd go into development. I actually had a medieval history degree like former Secretary of Defense Ash Carter, I believe also was a fellow medievalist, but I had to take a global history distribution in college, and that was about the Cold War and nuclear espionage and Klaus Fuchs and all that, and that set me off on a graduate school trajectory about nuclear nonproliferation and how the U.S. tried to control this technology at a critical moment for our nation, which I found really, really interesting. And I was in the UK for that, and I worked with a colleague who had worked at USAID, worked on the Ebola crisis and the very start of the campaign against ISIS under former President Obama, continued under President Trump. And so when I was looking at coming back to the United States to DC, he was like, hey, you should think about USAID. And I managed to get a job in the Food Aid Office, and I worked on the Rohingya refugee crisis in Bangladesh. I worked in Syria as well. And then I had the good fortune to work in the front office for a while, both under President Trump and then subsequently under President Biden and Administrator Samantha Power, which is fantastic. And then spent, like Joe, a lot of my career in the former Soviet Union and got to work the Ukraine war for about 2 years, as well as the Nagorno-Karabakh crisis in Armenia and Azerbaijan, which was just a fantastic experience, seeing the intersection of great power politics, development, national security, and getting to really see the impact that America has on the ground, which is one of the best things that you can see and one of the most sort of rejuvenating experiences you can have for your career in public service.
Thanks. I mean, I know both of your careers, and every time I hear it, I'm really in awe of how much you have done. So thank you both. Let's jump on the topic, Joe and Stephen. You wrote the foreign policy memo that argues that we need a foreign policy shift in the age of AI and all the technological changes that are happening around us. We have seen some of these changes in the last 4 years, but what is your main argument in this memo?
Yeah, no, this is something that we've been really working on at SCSP since day one, right? And I think the way that I always talk to our interns about and some of the younger staff about the work that we do really is, we're entering this world where it's the terra incognita. The work that we do here at SCSP really is mapping out what the future is supposed to look like. When we're thinking about foreign policy topics, grand strategy, the work that we do really is there's no one out there that has the answers. We're the ones who are really working to develop, working to craft, and write the answers about how the world is going to work and how it's going to look like. And so the key thing that we have in the memo is this idea that the world is in a platform battleground, platform competition, right? We're competing over technology platforms that a lot of the democratic platforms are built by the US, autocratic platforms are being built by China. How do we make sure that our platforms are the ones that win around the world? That's got to be a core function of how foreign policy thinks and what foreign policy does going forward, is that we're out there pushing forward our platforms to make sure that, we're continuing to shape how a lot of the basic functioning of everything works. Because, again, part of our core thesis at SCSP is that technology cuts across everything. It's in national security, it's in economic prosperity, it's in societal cohesion, how basic, not just rule of law, but just basic life is these days is really driven by technology. And so unless we're out there shaping how these technology platforms are operating around the world, we're really going to lose the character of what the American way of life looks like. And so for the American way of life to continue to really go forward and prosper, we need to make sure that U.S. foreign policy really is focused on pushing out our platforms, or the platforms that we support amongst our allies and partners, to make sure that the way of life that democracies have shaped over the past decades, over the past centuries, the basic freedoms, liberties that we enjoy here at home, that's what really determines how the world operates.
Stephen, I know you have in your paper 5 key objectives. Do you mind just walking the listeners and the viewers through those 5 objectives? Because I think they're really good from my perspective. And I think it really goes after what Joe was saying, that we are in this new battle of platform environment. When you look at the memo that was issued today by OpenAI, on the economic approach to how we build better models and how we attract allies and partners, I think your objectives really cut across all those points. But I think even more, it goes after how we need to be positioned for this new future in terms of the foreign policy and technology.
Absolutely. As Joe said, the geography of competition and for this period that we're entering in is going to be all about tech platforms. So the first objective that we have in there is all about ensuring that American-built, American-led, American-supported platforms are the engines for the transformation of the period that we're going through. We've seen with our adversaries a very cohesive package approach from Huawei and others in terms of trying to go and dominate the technology landscapes of a lot of countries around the world, emerging economies, as well as security partners. And so we need the U.S. and our allies to be in that ground game. Second, a lot of, as we often discuss here at SCSP, a lot of the innovation is happening in the private sector versus in government labs, which you saw after World War II. So making sure that we are able to leverage those resources we have in our society by making sure that the perspective of private industry is heard in sort of foreign policy circles, and getting private sector talent into government to be able to go and advise on that is critical for us. The third objective is essentially that we have to go and push back against the efforts of our adversaries in what we're calling sort of maximum pressure plus allies campaign on this, to both defend American innovation as well as make sure that our opponents are not the ones building these platforms overseas. Fourth, we have championing a disruptive freedom agenda, as we like to say. Of course, we're doing this for a reason, our way of life, the things that we have as a society. And so partnering with countries that also go and share this perspective on the American technology is going to be critical, as well as supporting those voices at the non-government level, whether it's businesses or civil society, pro-democracy groups, with sort of emerging technologies when it comes to protecting themselves and being able to go and organize and share information is critical. And then finally, as I'm sure the former civil servants of the row, and Joe, especially as a former State Department hand, would appreciate, is the need to transform the foreign policy institutions to be prepared for this era, to make sure it's organized internally and it has the tools it needs and the people in place to be able to go and compete with our adversaries.
So, Joe, to piggyback on Stephen's last point, institutional reform. You and I know this is really hard. There have been previous attempts to do institutional reform. But why do you think this time is A, crucial, B, why technology is that forcing function to finally do institutional reform at the foreign policy institutions that we have, state and AID, and why does it matter at the end of the day? Why does it matter for us, for our national security, for our American people?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. And I think, I mean, the reality really is if you talk to people on the inside, if you talk to professional civil servants who have worked in foreign policy for a long time, I mean, there's always tons of problems that everyone can point out, right? I mean, I remember one of the stories from the AI Commission days that when we worked together on the AI Commission, you always have that story about being able to use MacBooks, right? And, for the rest of us inside State Department or AID, like MacBooks are just kind of this entire universe of technology that we've never seen, right? And so,
or the cloud.
No, exactly. And so all of the technological change that's happened over the past decades, in many ways, bureaucracies aren't easily set up to adapt to change, right? They're put in place to really deal with a set of rules that were created at a certain period of time and not really adaptable to change. That's just kind of the nature of bureaucracy. And so for foreign policy, I think, the start of a new presidency, new Secretary of State, new president, new leadership across the U.S. government is always that time to really rethink how people do things. That's also part of the nature of the way our system works, right? People always have new ideas about how they want to change not just the instruments of state and foreign policy, but how the personnel operate within their departments. And so, a lot of the ideas that we are putting on paper really are, they're good ideas, obviously, there are ideas, but they're practical ideas about the things that, from our experience working on the inside, what do people want when it comes to having more technology? What do people want when it comes to streamlining the strategy that the department needs to execute? Technology really has transformed how everything operates. Again, that's part of the core thesis of what we do here at SCSP. But when you look at how the technology inside a U.S. government bureaucracy is, right, we're still pretty much stuck in the 2010s, if not the 20 aughts. And so, upgrading basic systems is a really easy thing to do, but making sure that the skills of understanding how to use AI, how to use the different emerging technologies that are going to affect national security, like these things are some of the things that we also need to train into civil servants, foreign servants, national security professionals across the entire system to understand what are the policies that they need to execute. And so I know there's always lots of concern about new presidents coming in, wanting to change things up. But the reality really is if you look at how things are operating around the world, right? There's so many conflicts going on. There's the war in Ukraine, prospect of conflict between China and Taiwan, war in the South China Seas. There's also a lot of going on in the Middle East as well, right? There's so much conflict going around the world. And so with any new administration coming into office, right? A new president, a new Secretary of State, and hopefully with Secretary Rubio going through confirmation later this week and hopefully being confirmed pretty quickly, he's going to want a new team that's going to help him implement all of the foreign policy work that he's going to need to do. And so making sure that we have a team there that's empowered and has the right technology and the right mindset to go out there to advance American interest, it really is pretty critical. And it's not just about the policy. There's a lot of internal reform that he's going to work on as well. That's carrying forward some of the work that Secretary Blinken has been working on. And so, Stephen, what do you think?
I absolutely agree. And from a USAID perspective, to give a little bit of a shout out to my alma mater, it was the first USG department or agency to adopt an enterprise license for ChatGPT, which is ahead of the curve and is very exciting. I think one of the reform recommendations we have as well is getting state outside the beltway to where the innovation is happening. Obviously, everyone's talking about Silicon Valley, but also in the American heartland when it comes to sort of ag tech and biotech, making sure that American foreign policy interests, approaches, personnel reflect the innovation environment of America outside of DC, as well as, in the private sector, in labs, in those sort of wider states and communities around the United States.
Joe, we talk a lot about this, but, technology, SCSP is built on the project from the 50s where, the nuclear weapons were the organizing principle. I mean, we created the set of allies in Europe, in Asia. Technology requires a different set of allies and partners. You talked a little bit about the platform competition with China. And so the next 4 years with the incoming administration, and you know this well from the time at the White House under Trump 1, it will require some tough conversation with some of our allies, but it will require, I think it's also a great opportunity to deepen relationship with our allies because, as you said, technology really is now the center of competition between us and China. So let's start there, and then for you, Stephen, the implications for the global South, because for the last 4 years we have seen a shift in terms of number of countries, the capabilities they use, the technologies they use, and so how do you think the next 4 years, or what should we do in the next 4 years with regard to the countries that are in between, they're hedging? I don't like to use the term global South, but I think we all understand what are we talking about. So over to you, Joe.
Yeah, no, it's going to be, we're already in a really disruptive era as it is, right? So I think people need to kind of step back and realize that it's not like a new president coming in is changing everything. A lot of things have already been changing. There's been a war going on in Ukraine since 2022, and even all the way back to 2014. There's been ongoing conflict in the Middle East for a long time, and there's still that prospect of conflict between China and Taiwan, and also around the world. I mean, there's just so much that's going on already as it is. And so people need to take a step back to realize that there are all of these trends out there. And so I think one of the things that we need to be mindful about is what are some of the new tools that we need to think about to help America address some of these problems. And again, technology is one of those core connecting threads. If you go through the literature that SCSP has been working on since day one. And so for allies and partners, a lot of the work that we need to think about too is it can't be a one-way street, right? It can't just be the U.S. sucking up resources from around the world to do whatever it is that we want to do. A lot of the talent, a lot of the technology, a lot of the IP, a lot of the intellectual capability, a lot of the resources and industries for a lot of the different technologies that we've laid out for the 6 battlegrounds around AI, biotech, future energy generation and storage, advanced compute, advanced robotics, and advanced networks. Like a lot of these different capabilities are all spread around the world. And so the reality is we're competing over all of these things with China. And if we approach allies as a take it or leave it proposition, they can really pretty easily leave it and go to China. And that's one of the things we need a new team coming in to realize. There really is a choice that allies and partners that we have around the world. They can look to either the US or they can look to China to figure out and shape what the rules of the road for the world will look like for the rest of this decade and for the rest of this century. And so a lot of the work that we need to do is really shaping and working with our allies and partners to figure out what are collaborative mechanisms we can build with our allies in these new tech battleground spaces. How can we work together and offer a different, better proposition than what China offers? And this is going to get to the global South issue as well that Stephen can talk about. But figuring out a new alliance structure is really critical to make sure that we can actually work together. And part of the problem that we're going to have to deal with is that since World War II, we've spent a lot of time organizing the world around this idea that we can all actually work together in common cause around one set of rules. But the reality that we've seen over the past decades is that China doesn't follow the rules that we've all otherwise agreed to. We have set up this structure where they appear to be playing by the rules, but they're really undermining a lot of the foundational ideas when it comes to fair trade and the basic fundamentals around economic cooperation that we've seen and try to build around the world over the past decades. And so we need to work on crafting a new set of rules to make sure that the U.S. and our allies and partners can work together and to make sure that we can cut out those pieces of threat within our systems that the PRC poses. I mean, a lot of the recent news that we've all been seeing here in the U.S. is how, and this was just on 60 Minutes over the weekend, about how Chinese cyber intrusions have been pretty pervasive and pretty active over the past years in such a way that they may be implanting cyber threats in our critical infrastructure to turn on at their choosing. And so the reality of the threat that we're facing from China on the tech landscape really is huge and really is a matter of grand strategy. And so we need to make sure that our allies and partners around the world understand that this is the threat landscape that we're seeing. We need to make sure that we have a broad mapping and understanding of what are the range of tech capabilities that the U.S. and our allies and partners have, and make sure that rather than competing against each other and running into each other, we're working together to compete against the PRC. Because if we're competing against each other and diluting some of the resources that we can bring to bear, rather than working together, the only winner is only going to be China. Yeah. And then the last bit of it is going to be like, how do we offer together a proposition to the rest of the world? So Stephen, over to you on.
No, absolutely. I think that it's important for listeners to know that this competition has been going on for well over the last decade as well. So one statistic I saw recently, one estimate is that approximately 70% of Africa's ICT infrastructure has been built by China. You've seen the ICT infrastructure of major U.S. security partners, like in Djibouti and Jordan, be built by Huawei. As Joe says, you absolutely do need to go and have a positive case here. You can't have the sort of countervailing offer be nothing. That's one of our recommendations as well, is working on developing a sort of tech package that's an offering of, not just sort of on the technological side, but when it comes to financing, when it comes to training, when it comes to sort of capacity development, using the positive tools of economic statecraft that the U.S. has and is used very effectively in other areas, as these countries in the global south, as you noted, are going through the exact same transformations, but starting from a very different set of circumstances when it comes to public health, when it comes to agriculture, when it comes to energy, all these issues. I think it was the S&P estimated, Standard & Poor's estimated that approximately 65% of global growth over the next 10 years is going to be happening in emerging markets. And if that's happening on Chinese-built infrastructure, the world is going to look very different for us at the end of that decade.
Right. You're absolutely right, Stephen. So Joe, let's talk a little bit about the threat picture. What's at stake, especially, Stephen mentioned the deployment of Chinese IoT technology, 5G network, primarily in Africa, Southeast Asia. What does that mean for us, for our national security, obviously, and our foreign policy?
Yeah, look, I think one of the things that we also need to be mindful about on the global threat landscape is, we have what we call the axis of disruptors, right? It's China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and its proxies. And a lot of what we've seen over the past couple of years is, looking at Ukraine, connecting this threat from Ukraine to the conflict in the Middle East, and then to the prospect of conflict in over Taiwan and maybe over the Philippines as well. Like, a lot of these axis countries, a lot of our adversaries are actually working together in a way that we haven't seen before. We always used to say that the U.S., one of the comparative advantages that the United States has over our authoritarian rivals is that we have a network of alliances that works together in a way that our rivals don't. But the reality is, like, the way that we're seeing China, Russia, Iran, North Korea cooperate in these conflicts really is qualitatively new, right? Like, who expected North Korean soldiers to be fighting on the front lines of Ukraine with Russia? And who knew that the Russians would need to rely on Iranian ballistic missiles and drones in order to help compete on the battlefield against the Ukrainians? And then also, if you look at what's happening in the Middle East, one of our good friends in Taiwan has a great platform called Taiwan AI Labs, and they are tracking all of the disinformation coming out of China. And one of the things that he's pointed out is that a lot of the false narratives about what's happening in the Middle East is actually being generated by Chinese bots directed at the U.S.
This is a really good point, Joe, because I think a lot of Americans don't understand all the propaganda that goes against us outside of the United States.
Yeah, a lot of these threads originate outside, and they get into our systems, and then people here believe them, and start spreading them as their own as well, right? And so, that connection among the Axis countries is something that's really becoming a real threat vector that we need to find a way to address, because again, the reality of this alliance cooperation doesn't just belong to America anymore.
No, I mean, case in point, I think at the tail end of last year, you saw Russia announce an effort to go and launch an AI alliance with the extended BRICS countries now. So there is this effort to build this parallel system around AI rules of the road, technological sharing. You see a lot of North Korean AI researchers are co-authors on studies coming out of Chinese universities, as well as, you see Russia and Iran working together in Ukraine on trying to integrate AI into the Iranian drones that have been used against Ukrainian critical infrastructure, so that if they're being jammed by electronic warfare capabilities, that nevertheless they're still able to get through and hit an electricity auto transformer.
And we started with the 5G global map in our mid-decades report back in 2022, right? And if you see the map essentially is red in terms of how Huawei, ZTE, and other Chinese companies are really outcompeting us on advanced networks. Now, obviously, a lot of the work that we're doing now is going into different technologies like low Earth orbit satellites with Starlink and Project Kuiper. There's a lot of new capabilities that we're bringing online, but if we look at some of these core tech battlegrounds that we've identified, advanced network is something that we started working on back in the first Trump administration. There's still a lot of work there that we need to do to not just build out different technologies, but actually invest in the R&D to have new technologies to be able to leverage to compete against what our adversaries are doing. But then also on AI, the Chinese have been catching up on AI for a number of years now. I know Eric used to talk about how he thought that the Chinese were about, they were never going to catch up, but when it comes to when it comes to chips, when it comes to the actual large language models that the Chinese have been able to develop, they're catching up in a way that basically means that we need to run faster and also do more to slow them down in a way that's going to be really important for a new team to think about what are the different range of tools that we can do to do this. Slowing them down on their own isn't going to be enough. We've been trying to do that for the past couple of years. Like, we need to find a way to run faster, and a lot of that's going to be bringing allied capabilities into the picture, because between more data, more energy, but then also building more products for markets, like, we need more of this in order to win when it comes to something like AI. Not just.
I agree with you, Joe. I mean, look, we're fortunate. We live right now at the moment where American companies are leading the space. From OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Microsoft, all these. And even X, when it comes to large language models. And then on the other side, you have NVIDIA, AMD, again, all American companies at the forefront of AI innovation. But that lead is not given, as you said. And, China is running fast. In some aspects, they have catch up with us. I mean, we just saw with 2 models over the break with DeepSeek and Queen, how fast they moved on the open source platform.
And on EVs. I mean, they're killing us on EVs.
Yeah, exactly. On EVs, yep. How does a country, I always use the example of how does a country that had a strict COVID lockdown emerge as a superpower manufacturing house in terms of EVs. I mean, these are hard things to build, and these are, cars that you don't want to underestimate, because they're, modern cars. It's a combination of electronics, software, and a big battery. And I think those are all 3 combinations that China is really good at. All right, this was incredible, guys. Thank you so much. But before I'll let you go, one quick question for the end. We have a lot of interns that spend time with us. I'm sure a lot of people that are in grad schools around the country think about joining federal government, think about joining departments and agencies. What would be your message to them? Why they should do this? Why is it, compelling and, important for any of the new graduates to come to Washington? Go through the metro station every day and join one of the departments and agencies, in long hours, being overworked, underpaid, for the purposes of what?
Well, I think it hasn't been so long that I was one of those folks on the metro heading to Metro Center and trudging my way over to the Reagan building. But all the things that I remember really wanting at that age before coming to government, to serve a cause bigger than myself, to understand how the world really worked, to go and see people and experience cultures that I never got to go and visit before. There's hardly anywhere better that I can think of than the U.S. government for going to work on those issues. We always used to joke about how every important issue was chronically understaffed, which meant if you're a young person at the start of your career and you listen and you work hard and that sort of thing, you can have a huge impact at a very early age inside the government. And it's just such a fantastic experience that I'm sure will shape the rest of my career.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think, one of the things that, again, I talked about this at the beginning about how, being an immigrant to this country, like being able to give back is something that's just really important for me personally. But if you think about like all of the things that our government does, right? Literally, there's something, regardless of your interest set, there's something that you can do inside government, because a lot of the work that goes into it is protecting, serving, advancing the broad national interests for our country. And in many ways, like if you think about everything that, it's not just the military, but there's a lot of work on education, on health, and on agriculture that our government does. And so being able to serve a national purpose and national mission, I think really helps give young people that sort of mindset about like what it is that that defines our way of life, right? How does our system operate? How does civics work within our country? And I think, in many ways, like we've kind of lost touch with some of these ideas, right? As the private sector has proliferated and people want to go into work in different fields and people want to be social media influencers, there's a lot that our government does that, you're just not really going to know until you work inside to see how it operates. And the skills, like Stephen was saying, that you get from being on the inside will really translate into anything you want to do on the outside. And so I think, having that sort of national service mindset and national mission mindset is something that's unique for our government and that we also have here, luckily at SCSP, that really helps sets up young people for success in anything they want to do going forward. And the reality also is like there are tons of really, really smart people that you will find that you can only find inside the government. And being able to learn from some of these people is just one of the best experiences that I've had in my career, obviously working with you and working with Jenna McMaster, Fiona Hill, amazing, amazing people that are at the top of their field, and being able to learn from them, but and learn some of the core skills for how we need to be as professionals is just one of the things that's hopefully, we can encourage some more young people here on the team as well to think about government service as they go.
I agree with both of you guys. I mean, there's nothing I think more rewarding than walking in any given building that has a clear mission to help American people to advance our national security interests. Thank you again for being with me here today. I think your memo is really important at a really critical time. So job well done there. And to those of you watching or listening, thank you for staying with us at SCSP.